Mm.
What's that? Ask me. The level, intense. It's well, I don't think that we've done enough research in this country, right? Yeah, Gala would release what they've done, right? But we as a country are just research around issues relating to LGBTQI A plus community. So it's like how I feel about the fact that there aren't enough programs that are run.
Hey? Mm-mm.
Check.
Not really. I have things to do, but not gig wise. Yeah. Why? What's up? No, no, no. No, when Brand South Africa books, I don't book anything on that day.
So development aid. Let's all go outside and like find proper money to do research that allows us to do the work that
and thank you to the organizers for affording us this opportunity. I am Umukhulu Daunyane Mguni. I am the founder and the executive director of an NPO called GBV Monitor South Africa. And what we do there is basically to really try to elevate our national conversation around how we frame GBV, our understanding of GBV, the kind of solutions that we need to be looking at to co-create the future that is more equitable, a future where women and young children can really claim to have had the chance to access justice. And how we do that is through 3 focus areas in our work, and that is through research. The second thing that we also look at is to do a systemic evaluation of the rural criminal justice system. And the reason that we were looking at that specifically was from a realization in the work that I've been doing previously, that when we do talk about justice and access to justice, people who are in marginalized communities are often left in the periphery in that aspect. And so I identified that as an area of concern, an area that needs immediate and urgent action, and that is to center the voices and the experiences of women who are in rural areas. The last thing, which is really the star, I call it the star of our organization's work, is our online GBV tracker. And what the online tracker intends to do is really to bring a nuanced assessment and an evaluation of the experiences of women once they enter the criminal justice system. We are interested in getting an understanding of what are the factors behind women who drop out of the criminal justice system. We know that women report. The stats tell us that women are reporting these incidents. But at the back end of that, we know that, less than 9% of reported incidents of GBV actually secure a conviction at the very end. So that tells you that there is a problem. There's a missed opportunity that we need to see how we can plug ourselves in there. So that encompasses briefly the work that we do. Thank you.
Amazing stuff.
All right. Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Musisiwe Kamulani Khadima, and I'm an attorney and research coordinator at the Center for Applied Legal Studies. Now, Center for Applied Legal Studies, CALS, we work through research, through advocacy, and through litigation, really across 5 intersecting programs. So we work around business and human rights, environmental justice, gender justice, civil and political justice, as well as rural democracy and what it means to have home and land. But particularly, we've done a lot of work, or throughout our programs, our work requires us, or we've had the privilege of being able to work with a lot of movements, social movements, grassroots organizations, community networks, etc. And something that we've realized in our work with activists as a whole is really the experiences of victimization. And this prompted us to conduct research to try to see what are the experiences of activists in South Africa, and what are these victimization experiences that they're going through. And we published the first report that really talked a lot about some of the experiences that activists are having. And in addition, working on a second report that focuses on different kinds of activists specifically. And one of those activists is gender activists, or activists that fight for gender rights. And really realizing the different experiences that activists that fight for gender rights and gendered issues are facing, and what that means in the broader scheme of things for fights against gender-based violence, for fights against patriarchy, abuse of power, etc., and what it means for that space of communicating dissent, of that space of freedom of expression no longer being what it's supposed to be. What does that mean overall for the country? And that's the work that we do.
They do a lot. Hi, my name is Tammy Dish from the Tammy Dish Foundation. And I think that we were founded just in 2005, 6, I think. And the work that we do has really been about bringing communities together and bringing the entire sector, the LGBTQI sector together. I think our strength in the past has been being able to create platforms such as these ones as well, where we allow people to gather and to engage and to try and find a unified kind of solution to some of the challenges that we face. So I think most of the work that we do is also referral kind of stuff, because as we take on these new cases or discoveries that people channel to us, we also recognize that we're not perhaps the people to deal with the cases firsthand, but we do have a lot of other groups of companies or organizations that deal with the work. So we work largely on referrals. And we fell into it, you know. We organized a fun event called the Feather Awards, and then they said it was a queer event, and then everything that is queer will get an email, hi, this just happened to me, this just happened to me. So ours is to channel where that goes, but it's also forced us in the past to kind of lean in a bit more and to have a clearer understanding of you know, the needs of communities. So we bridge the gap. I often say that we play the role of being like the Holy Spirit. Yes, and somewhere in there, you know, we must be able to know someone who can do something and connect the dots and make sure that we find a solution. Yep.
We just then start with the fundamentals, because I think what's key in bringing about change is definitely defining the problem. So I'd like us as the collective to basically unpack any harmful social beliefs or cultural norms that play a role in reinforcing this power imbalance, and in so perpetuating violence against women and other marginalized groups.
Yeah, I mean, when we refer to, you know, socialization and how that, you know, plays a critical part in how young, you know, boyhood is formed, or manhood is informed. That is part of the socialization process that we are talking about. I always say that in order to really try to eliminate GBV, you need to start them young. And that entails teaching young boys that part of being a boy doesn't mean you can be naughty and grab a little girl's arm and twist it in order to get her attention, right? You've already crossed the boundary there. That's abuse. It's violent behavior.
Yes.
You know, telling young girls that, oh, cross your legs, don't sit like that. You're already starting to socialize young girls to being constrained, right? When we talk about how religion plays a role in GBV, we are talking about the man is the head and the woman is the neck. You're already disempowering the woman in that, because if you're defining, you know, your role in a marriage as that of the neck that only allows for the head to turn in a particular direction, that comes from a place of disempowerment. We are talking about religion and how that plays a very critical part in creating this disbelief that women in marriages can't get raped. Your body belongs to your husband. You know, you must always make yourself available to your partner. Those are the kind of, you know, gender norms that are really entrenched in society, that creates this cycle that just does not end, and it perpetuates violence. So that would be, you know, my few points on that. But actually, just to add to this, we need to start creating a culture where our initial response to GBV is to believe survivors when they speak. our initial response is always to second guess the victim or the survivor, to look for reasons. She is an attention seeker. She is looking to ruin Tabor's career. So those are just a few things that I would say are important when we have our conversations in our so-called spaces, you know, our so-called social circles, when we have friends who make remarks that are filled with sexual innuendo, and it's supposed to be a joke, but it's not a joke because it's such a serious matter. That is
Exactly.
GBV, you know, continuing to entrench us, continuing to keep women silenced, this culture of silence that perpetuates. And these are the small ways. You really don't need to be doing anything big and dramatic. It's in the small actions that you start to take. And then the one person, just on that one day, who you can have a conversation with, and they leave that conversation more enlightened, maybe uncomfortable, and that is also okay.
Yeah.
Part of us growing is to be, you know, okay with discomfort, to be okay with that moment of tension, to walk into that tension and to walk into that discomfort, and realize that we all are going through a learning and a growth process. Nobody has the template, you know, as to what this thing should be or what this thing looks like, but it's important to always have an agreement, a consensus on what are we talking about when we say bodily autonomy? What are we
Yes.
talking about when we talk about GBV and its different manifestations, whether that's financial abuse, you know, psychological abuse? There needs to be a consensus across the board on what these things are.
We make a joke about a lot of things, you know, and I think for a while, I've always said that it takes a personal experience also for one to get into a room and say, I was quiet at some point when this comment was made, and I didn't say anything, but that was some kind of violation. And I think it happens within our circles, and we watch it and we laugh about it. I mean, people make jokes about it, you know, and I think also sometimes, and you could use like both approach for this, where others prefer calling people out. I prefer calling people in because I think there's more power in us in like teaching somebody else about our experience. Nobody has knowledge of anyone's back end story, and we do stupid things like spank somebody's bum walking across. I mean, like, I'm a gay man, and there's another gay man who feels like it's okay for them to spank my bum, and it's like, no, it's actually not cool. Just because we're gay doesn't mean that I actually appreciate
Would
that.
appreciate
You know,
that,
like, I
yeah.
mean, consent is a big thing that must become part of our conversation. Earlier on, she was talking about, like, you know, religion and religion playing its part, as well as culture. Like, I mean, I the other day in a long conversation with friends over great wine, I was like, I can't believe that we've actually allowed culture and people who abuse culture to dictate who we must be in our world and in our society. I can't believe that we erase the existence of humans on a daily basis, and everything else that's tied to it. Like, I have to sit and go to KwaPata in the Eastern Cape and be told by a king there that I can't come in wearing a dress because I'm a man. Meanwhile, they wrapped around in just a cloth and beaded work. I'm just like, there's a disconnect somewhere there, because there's
Definitely.
just, you know, we're not, we're not, why is my existence not, you know, seen, acknowledged? Why is my appearance on a daily basis a struggle? You ask yourself why young girls not safe walking, or young guys or human beings, why are they not safe for walking on the streets wearing whatever it is they want, you know? So expression is a big conversation, because a lot of times when you do go to report these cases, they'll say things to you, like the system that we have, which is kind of built to work against the you know, victims, I'd say it. But you go to a police station and they'll ask you, what were you wearing? What did you say? what happened, give us history on all of these things. And it's always like, let's give it what we're talking about, a 24-hour watch or 48-hour watch before we decide on how serious this case is. And so when we talk about those things, we have to also look at how systemic this thing is and how it's just built to not work for the victim. The victim in this country is not the priority.
You know, I also think about the saying that every woman knows someone that's been sexually assaulted. But if you ask men, they don't know anybody who sexually assaulted someone. And that tells you something. Because, you know, it speaks again to accountability. You know, it speaks again to, you know, what my fellow panelists have said, as we're being able to hold other people accountable, to hold one another accountable. And that looks different, right? It could be, I'm holding you accountable the way that you're behaving, or what you're saying, or what you're doing, that's not okay. Or holding people accountable in bigger spaces. You know, in your workplace, for example, different sorts of situations. What are we doing to hold one another accountable? And this also goes back to the bigger systems. So then you have the police, then you have the criminal justice system, etc. And there's this complete disintegration of what it's supposed to do for survivors and how it's supposed to work for survivors. But on top of that, there is an accountability for anyone that's there, for how the system is working, for how the system needs to change, you know? And I think as soon as we, and I mean, these conversations have been had over and over again. Everybody is aware about the fallouts. I'll talk about the criminal justice system because I'm a lawyer. But the fallouts, even with the criminal justice system itself, nobody can say they're unaware of that, you know? But what are the changes that have been implemented, and what are the ways that those that are supposed to implement these changes, how are they being held accountable for these, you know? So that it's a response socially, within society, but it's also a response within the systems that's supposed to work as guards, you know, as if it doesn't work out, what then happens within the systems? How are then survivors getting solution, getting justice, getting all sorts of whatever justice looks like for a survivor? But the systems that are there in place, how do we make sure that they work the way that they're supposed to be working, so that there isn't this continuous, you know, almost secondary victimization, continuous of not even wanting to hold perpetrators accountable because you let the system fall apart.
Yeah.
It's not almost, it's always.
Always.
Always secondary victimization.
Yeah, I think so. Now that we understand where this stems from, and I think you guys unpacked it pretty well, let's fast forward to 2022. And I think, Omogelo, this one is for you, for the Gender-Based Violence Monitor. What does 2022 look like in terms of stats relative to that of, you know, previous years? What are we working with? What is South Africa's reality right now?
Thank you for that. You know, we live in a country where women are just not safe. And that is not to say women are not safe outside and in public spaces. They're not safe at home. They're not safe at work. And the stats tell us that. So we don't have stats from 2022, apart from the cases that we have been looking at GBV Monitor South Africa. But just to, you know, give you an overview before coming back to us at the organization, when we look at, you know, the trends from the SAPS criminal quarter crime stats report, we see that, you know, in one quarter we had about 9,500 rape incidents that were reported, and then in the, you know, August to December period, we had 11,315 incidents that were reported. So that tells us a number of things. It tells us first that women are making use, they are trying to utilize the resources that are available to them, and that is going to the police station to report that this is what has happened to me. The second thing is that it also shows us that there is a consistent increase of GBV incidents, and that is historical till now. So whether it is an increase that says to us that it means more women are being victimized, or whether it is that women are now having an increased confidence to go to a police station to report, that is another discussion. I think that is something that is worth looking into. But what the stats are also telling us is that black women and black women who are of working class are far more vulnerable to being victimized as people who would then experience GBV. And that tells us that that is something that we should be looking into. There needs to be a solution and additional support mechanisms that should be in place specific to a rural context, specific to the challenges that women in peri-urban rural areas are facing, right? And what we have picked up at the organization is that, because our data sources, I just need to track back a little bit. So where we pick up our cases is through the media and through assistance from the National Prosecuting Authority. And one of the things that we are now looking at is seeing that a lot of the cases that are reported in the media are of women who are in urban areas. So we are talking about the Tsehofatsopules, the Karabo Mukwenas, the Nositelom Debenis. These are women who are in urban areas, East London, Roodepoort, Uinene was in Cape Town, right? So what does that start to communicate to society? What kind of a narrative is now being built in our understanding of GBV? Is that GBV only matters when it's the voices and the experiences of women who are in urban areas who are suffering. We don't know what is happening to Omoholo who lives in Tabanchu, a rural area 50, 60 kilometers from Bloemfontein. We don't hear those stories. It is an injustice in that those voices remain unheard. It is an injustice in that every time the media gives us, a case, it is of these people in the social class. It invisibilizes and delegitimizes those experiences. The second thing that we are also looking at, and something that I'm now starting to think deeply about from GBV Monitor, is that the cases of women who are reporting to police are very few that represent white women. Now, we don't know if it's because white women possibly have far more resources and could look at other means, right, for access to justice than to go to a police station. So out of the 111 cases that we are looking at, there's only 3 white women who are on our tracker. So there's a conversation that we need to have there in terms of intersectionality when we're talking about GBV. Who are the victims? It can't be that it's just black women. White women are victims of GBV, and when women then start to look at ways of getting justice, what does that look like for them? So the stats, which one of my panelists has already mentioned, is that we have a less than 9% conviction rate for rape cases. So what does that mean when the quarterly crime stats come out and we are told that 9,000 cases have been reported, right? That tells us that only a few hundred of those 9,000 women who have reported will get a conviction further down the line. So this is exactly why we need to be very critical of when we read the stats and what kind of a meaning we start to derive from them. I was very critical recently when Minister Cele released the quarterly crime stats, because he made a statement that it's a catastrophe, as if he is not someone who doesn't have the power to do anything about it, right? It is a catastrophe because one of the things that I highlighted in my assessment of the crime stats is that Lusikisiki, which is a rural village in the Eastern Cape, has remained as a top 3 area where police, top 3 in the country with the highest incidents that have been reported of rape. But what is being done about it? It is not enough to have these stats and to say this is an accountability, an exercise of accountability, an exercise of transparency to say this is what is happening and then leaving it there. We need to go further and say what are the stats telling us in terms of what we should be doing. So that would be my contribution there.
Yeah. So I think just going back to the trends, Umokolo, I think we are a part of a generation who has birthed many a movement. We've seen #MeToo, we've seen #AmINext. Which movements do you think have had an impact and why?
I would say #the total shutdown is definitely a movement that stands out to have gone just, tweeting, but it was followed by important action. There was a lot of mobilization that was done, a lot of coordination to bring activists together across the spectrum to say it is enough. We cannot continue in this way. So total shutdown stands out for me because we can now attribute, the NSP on GBV to the total shutdown movement. It was through that mobilization that they did for the president to now start to take action to say, we really do have a national crisis and we can't continue in that way. There are other social media hashtags that we've had. I mean, we've had #AmINext, we had #Justice for Tseho, Justice for Nositelo, #MenAreTrash. And they are beneficial to the cause because the conversation comes back in a very public way that you cannot ignore on GBV.
Yes.
But what we have failed in our social media activism is to really take it further. We have men like Arthur Mafokate who are abusers and they still have platforms. And that is an injustice. While you look at the United States and they have the #MeToo movement, men like Harvey Weinstein have had to go to jail. We have Bill Cosby, who is now serving jail time. We have the Mute R. Kelly movement, which has taken R. Kelly now, to a point of having to account for his transgressions. So I think we need to see more of these perpetrators accounting. And if there's no opportunity to account, but an atonement needs to happen. And a way of seeking justice for survivors that really centers their own idea of what justice is. So justice for me maybe might not be my perpetrator going to jail, but it would be an apology, and that would be okay. So we really need to have those social media movements that really take us beyond just tweeting and trending, and then we leave it to the next time something else that's gruesome and heinous happens. Then we come back to our cell phones. We need to take it further.
Yeah. So I think on the topic of movements, I'd like to bring in CULS here, the Centre of Applied Legal Studies, to really just discuss the people behind the movements and what you believe is one of the biggest challenges they are facing right now.
Sasha, it's almost like a double-edged sword here.
Yeah.
Because, if you're a survivor and you're speaking out, there's a lot of victimization that comes, to you, etc. I mean, everything from the police to your immediate family to your community, all of that. But in addition to that, if you are someone that is, actively leading certain movements, for example, the #MeToo movement, or whatever, you're actively involved in advocating against gender-based violence or gendered rights, etc., all of those things, there is, we found, victimization that you experience because you are doing that.
Yes.
And I say it's a double-edged sword because it's as if there's a move to silence people from speaking against, gender-based violence and other issues. Activists that fight for gender rights and sexual minority rights face everything from cyberbullying was one of the biggest things that activists mentioned doing. And like I said, we did research with this, so literally speaking to different gender activists and trying to understand what experiences they're having. Cyberbullying is a big thing. Why? Also because, like my panelists alluded to as well, social media is a big platform for activism. And so, unfortunately, then it's also one of the biggest platforms in which they receive this sort of victimization, this pushback. The other thing is a lot of discrediting. It's interesting that what we also found is queer activists, women activists, are more at risk of being discredited than men. And that's interesting because there's always this concerted effort to discredit, especially women that are leading movements, queer activists that are leading movements. There's this concerted effort to discredit them. And so not only are you trying to shine attention to this issue of gender-based violence, but because you are doing that, you are also experiencing some form of victimization. And that makes it difficult because it then sort of says, don't say anything about this. Don't challenge power. Don't try to shut down what's happening. Don't try to speak out against what's happening. Don't try to call for accountability for what's happening. Don't try to change the norm or what's happening in society. Leave it as it is, which of course nobody can live in that situation. Toxic masculinity is toxic for everyone, for men, for women,
Yes.
for everyone,
Yes.
So we can't live in a society where these things continue unchallenged, where you're not allowed to say anything. But for those who dare to say something, they face so much victimization. And it's also sort of a means of making people scared, of making people scared to speak out, intimidating people. A lot of activists also mentioned about how, they would be sort of intimidated. Sometimes there's even a use of the civil or criminal system, to victimize them. So I'm being unlawfully arrested, being faced with defamation suits. That's also
Yes.
a big thing. Sometimes being faced with protection orders as well that are instituted against you if you dare to call out your perpetrator or something like that. And so there's this continuously continuous means of trying to make people not say anything about it. And again, this goes back to sort of challenging how we change the society that's so high of gender-based violence. How do we change that if people that are taking the effort to change that are facing this form of victimization? And it's rapid. There's a rapid shrinking civic space. It's continuing to grow. And I think we're not paying enough attention to this that's happening, but it's so integral to us really getting the kind of change society that we're looking to have.
Yeah. So, understanding that there is a great deal of intersectionality that is at play, with use of the gendered lens, with the gendered approach, let's unpack what the woman activist would experience. What would that look like for them?
We spoke to one of the, in doing our report, spoke to one activist who said she was arrested several times because she's an active activist in her community. But she was arrested again few days after she had given birth. And you can imagine kind of the implications of that. She lives alone with her kids. She's just given birth to a baby. She's picked up again by police, and this time for something that she wasn't even involved in, for a protest that happened that she wasn't even involved in because she was in hospital giving birth. And so you see how victimization as a whole is not good for any activist, whatever gender you are. But you see with women activists particularly, you find all of these nuances, and it's also, what we found as well is that it's as if women human rights defenders or women activists are seen as sort of easier targets for killings as well. I'm sure a lot of you are aware about Umam Fikile Njangase, who was killed for being she was a woman human rights defender in her community, in a mining affected community, and she was killed for her work really related to activism. And so there's this feeling that it's easier to kill women human rights defenders, and so they have to sort of take more concerted efforts to protect themselves. And then, of course, you know, when a woman is arrested and is sitting in jail, what are those impacts that's having with her? You know, queer activists also have also mentioned how, you know, even within their own spaces, even within their own activist spaces, there's still this sort of ignorance, you know, even from fellow activists, etc. A lot of intimidation as well, a lot of harassment as well. So there really is all of these gendered impacts that come alive when you look at victimization, and really taking us into having to have these discussions on how do we address these things, and how do we
Yes.
solve problems.
Yes. Now, although we can obviously agree that women have been disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, I think we can also recognize that GBV transcends gender,
Yeah.
and that there are other groups who are plagued with this but don't receive the necessary attention. And I think, you know, Tammy, that's where you come in and, you know, discuss the impact and how GBV impacts the LGBTQIT plus community.
Hey, no, don't worry.
I was on it.
LGBTQI.
A plus.
Yeah, you know. I was going to say earlier on when Umuholo was speaking that I think we speak about women a lot, and I appreciate that, but also just generally, there are lots of other boy children who go through all of this. There are it's everyone who goes through some kind of gender-based violence. I mean, you think of kids living in homes where they're being abused, you know, by parents. So we must factor in the issue of hate crimes being under the GBV banner, you know.
Yes.
I mean, I've gone through some parts of the NSP, and often you find that there's so many. Point 6.1 has also got an inclusion of LGBTQI people, but there's no real lived experience of how that translates, you know. What are those plans put in place to ensure that, you know, a queer body and it's really historic, you know. I think you if you've grown up or you were raised in a home where you watched a lot of abuse happen in front of you, it becomes a little bit difficult for you at a later stage to actually stand up and to speak or to say this was wrong, this was right. There are also issues of patriarchy princesses that exist. So many of our sisters stand up for their brothers who continue to abuse other women, and our mothers do the same because
Yeah,
they come from
exactly.
that history. And the same happens with queer groups, you know. We don't talk about it. We're so used to that abuse, so used to the abuse, and we know that with so many cases that have been taken forward, nothing or not a lot has happened in terms of the criminal justice system. And so that
Yeah.
discourages a queer body from going to report. But,
Yes.
but we're also scarred internally. And I think it's only fair that we acknowledge it, we own it, and we talk about it. We can be abusive to each other as partners and even as friends, as colleagues, as siblings. It's layered. The
Yeah, it's
various
unknown.
layers of that domestic violence that exists. You know, so
Yes.
those things had to be unpacked a lot more, so that we're able to not feel like I'm gay and I can't go and report a case.
Yeah.
I'm lesbian and this is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trans women on a daily basis go through the most, and they go through the most when it gets to, you know, the SAPs, because it's like, but I'm trans, I've been abused, you're trying to figure out if I'm a man or a woman, and which cell am I being taken to, and you know, like there's so much.
Yes.
And I feel like there's not enough education that's given to us as citizens to empower us on what they're supposed to do when you get to
Yes.
the police station, what's
Yes.
supposed to happen. I had a case like 3 weeks ago where one lady took a case to the police station, and they said, no, we can't actually open the case for you because it needs to be something that's resolved between the two of you. And I'm like, no, that's not a decision you take.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
when you're at a police station, you open your job, your primary job is to open the case. Whether or not I want to follow through with the case, it's got nothing to do with you. I know that the system is supposed to follow through either way, whether I appear one day or not, but your job is to register the case and register it as I'm saying as a victim, this is where I am. So there's a lot that needs to be really understood from that level. I feel like
Yes.
we don't know our rights, and you know, this is why Human Rights Festival is here. We don't know our rights, and I think the people who serve us equally don't know their rights.
Oh,
And they don't know
it's
the law.
just- Wow. So I think on the topic of secondary victimization, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Secondary victimization that is experienced by the justice system, by this community, and the policy that governs this, you know, because there is a disconnect in terms of what's implemented on the level of the executive and what's experienced on the ground, because you mentioned the NSP earlier. What are your views around the National Strategic Plan's core messaging around GBV for the LGBTQIA+ community?
I think it's a beautiful document. It reads really well, but
Does it translate there?
no, and not to take it away from
Yeah.
them. I think they've done well, but there has to be like additional effort being put behind ensuring that we are dealing with issues of domestic violence or GBV under that banner at the level of the LGBTQIA+ community. We're always like there at the end, you know, there's no urgency around ensuring that there's clear messaging that is there. So you give people 1.6 billion and you say, here it's going to the GBV project in the country, and we don't know where, or nobody is being accountable for saying
For
there's
where it
400
went.
million that's sitting at social development to give psychosocial services to other people. There's 600 that's sitting, or 200 that's sitting at health, and there's 400 million that's sitting at SAPS. So I think all of those things must also be made clear to people so that we understand what access do we actually have, and what does this pretty white paper mean for my life, you know.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it's like reading a speech, right? Because I think that we read speeches really well, and they're written really well, and they're written to say the right thing and to always have the right answer for everyone. And it's not true. I think we must also not be allergic to people's reality and their truths. And we as citizens and South Africans must also be brave enough to say when we're wrong and when we have not done right by our people, and find out what is the best way to solve this problem. So to answer your question, is like, when you do write those documents, yes, there's a small group of people consulted, but what does it look like in terms of executing it? So when we talk inclusion, include us from there. so that we
Yes.
don't feel like, oh, there's this group out, including the LGBTI community, and we don't know where to go. So bring everybody in, invite everybody in to play their part, essentially, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a disconnect. There's a huge disconnect. I mean, I imagine if women who are activists on a daily basis around GBV are complaining about understanding the NSP and are complaining about some of the processes, what more of me, who is a queer women, man, who's got all of these challenges? Where's my go-to place?
Exactly. So important that we get to a space where we live by, you know, what we say and actually just put things into action. I've always craved this, you know, moving from this space into the arena, because that's where we're meant to be playing. And I think
on the ground.
Yeah, on the ground. And I think just bringing it back to Carl's here, still on the topic of the LGBTQIA plus community. From your point of view, what are the activists experiencing? And I think you and Tammy can actually also have that conversation, because you yourself...
Do you know, strangely, just before we started the conversation, an audience member asked me a question and said, what are the stats of like LGBTQI people and GBV or IPV or whatever, the violence? What are the stats? And I was like, well, you know, we can't really be accurate because there aren't really a lot of stats. So a lot of times we depend on like development aid to come in and help us do research work. In this country, nothing is a problem unless you can present a research document that says, here's a problem. But here we are. I'm a living example and I'm living proof, and I'm here and I'm telling you there's a problem, but there isn't enough done for this country and for queer people living in this country to ensure that there's proper research put behind understanding the intricate experiences of our queer community. So research is always important, but research also goes to those other individuals, and then maybe we'll bring in like the LGBTQI community. And then maybe when somebody else actually does give you those stats, we'll just make them part of the document. So I think let it be open and broad, you know? We can't every single day, and I'm getting into your next question, like around activism, like on a daily basis, we're always looking at ourselves thinking, should we be doing this again? Am I going to be bashing somebody else's door? Am I screaming at a police station? Am I screaming inside a boardroom? Am I shouting at the door of this? Am I, you know, like it feels like why us always protesting, you know? Don always says we must come here at Conhill and bring all your demands to the constitutional court here. This is the highest court of the land, but it always must be a fight before we get to, hey, somebody is listening to you. You know, it always must be those cases that are highlighted. So
why isn't it autonomous?
During COVID, we had so many killings of the queer community. We can only count, like, say, 30 or so plus people that we think we know, names that we know, but there are queer people that are killed on a daily basis, and that's as a result of a hate crime. So how are we making sure that that is being carried by what we're doing as the GBV program? You know, how are we addressing all those things? Because if it's not a Tami, a Gala, or Exodus chapter 2, you know, Utingo or PIFSEC, somebody else is not, we're not doing, you know, enough. And the only time media also plays a role. Like the only time you ever want to cover things around queer people, it's like when we're going to Pride and we're all colorful. There's so many different stories on a daily basis that affect us that we're not covering. So everybody's got a role to play. And I feel like when you ask about the challenges of like activists on a daily basis, it's how to identify everyone's role and to know exactly what it is that they're supposed to do.
Exactly. And Kels, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think inclusiveness is so important. And you know, the problem is also that there's a big misunderstanding of, and I say misunderstanding because I don't want to say it's just an attitude problem, but let's call it a misunderstanding.
I think it's the latter even.
But you can also say
you
that.
You can say it's the latter. It's okay.
You know, of for example, police, what they're supposed to be doing in protests. Let me use that as an example. the Right to Protest project does a lot of work around the right to protest in South Africa, and they've done lots of research reports on this as well. Because police don't understand what's their job at protests, there's this continuous excessive use of force on protesters. There's this mishandling of protesters, unlawful arrests. And we call them unlawful arrests because just because somebody's protesting doesn't mean they have to be arrested. That's not a thing, right? And so there's a lot of these unlawful arrests, a lot of this excessive use of force. And now the issue is that it's now also private security. Private security is also now guilty of, these use of excessive force, mishandling of protesters. Was it last year where someone was killed, a bystander during a Wits protest, who was shot and died? Do you understand? Somebody that wasn't even part of they were passing by, they weren't even part of the protest. And so you see this continuing in space. So that's why I say I think it's a bit of an attitude or a misunderstanding of what people's rights are, and that people have a right to protest. And what is your job, or what is your role when you are security, when you are police in a protest, is to just make sure that everybody can be safe. And by everybody, you mean protesters as well. That when protesters are exercising their right to protest, their constitutional protected right to protest, when they're expressing their right to freedom of expression, that they are also safe, that they're able to do that in a safe environment. And so I think we need to make sure that state, police, private security, and that's a very controversial one, but we won't get into that. Private security, for argument's sake, also knows what is their role, or what are they supposed to be doing in that places, so that we don't find ourselves in instances where police say stuff like, there was a protest, was it last week or so, the right to protest was again assisting that movement, and police said something ridiculous like, you guys are, it was a feministic movement that was protesting, I'll arrest you now, you feministic movements, but saying it in a derogatory manner. And so having that kind of attitude, that kind of idea of this is how you need to treat people. And I want to say this as well, because it really also reflects how there's a treatment of black people in a particular way. There's a treatment of poor working class people in a particular way by police. And you see this, unfolding. And we understand that, in order for these things to stop, there has to be some way in which, when police do this, they are held to account. There shouldn't be this power dynamics, these power relations where even, the Metro Police feel like, no, you need to pay us a fee in order for us to grant you permission to protest. You don't grant anyone permission to protest. You notify the authorities that you're going to have a protest, then they must put things into place. So that's why I'm saying there's this a misunderstanding of what people's rights, and when people that are in authority misunderstand the rights of other people or don't want to understand the rights of other people, there's the suppression of people's rights. And the suppression of people's rights can lead to a place where there's this explosion of victimization and etc. And so just taking it back again to the LGBTQI community as well, when there's a misunderstanding of how are people supposed to be treated, people as a whole, there shouldn't be this thing of, it's a secondary thought, let's by the way, the LGBTQI community. No, that shouldn't be the place. It should be from the get-go, we are including all people, and everybody's rights matter, and everybody, the issues, the rights, the advocacy of all people should be front and center. There shouldn't be this thing of there are certain people within the community that must feel like they are, on the outside or anything like that. So there really must be concerted efforts to make sure that everybody's rights are respected, but most importantly, when people are doing whatever that they need to do in order to advocate for their rights, in order to educate, accept whatever that it is that people want to do, there is space to be able to do that, because that's what a democratic South Africa should be. And immediately, if we shrink this space to be able to allow people to freely be themselves, freely express themselves, freely associate, then we immediately then need to challenge what we call then a democratic, inclusive society. Yeah.
I think the issue of language also, just to jump in there, Sasha, the issue of language, so we worked on a project in the Eastern Cape, and we were sitting with a bunch of queer children who were talking about how Some of them have laid charges and they've lost their cases because I think the law also becomes very technical at some point. And when you come from rural areas, you know, we don't have like honest conversations, or we're not like straightforward. This is a penis and this is a vagina, right? Because it's not a thing. It's not the conversation. And so when you don't teach your children from an early age what things are and call them by their name and say that this is wrong and this is right, you're going to end up in a situation where when you go to court, you read this document and somebody says, umalume uthathe ubhuti wakhe wamfaka kusisi wami. It's like, umalume uthathe ubhuti wakhe wamfaka kusisi wami. That's not like the language that we're speaking. These kids are struggling. They just want to say, he took his penis and, you know, he raped me. So people get away because of like technicalities, and people get away. I mean, the system is, I know of like unfortunate cases where it was because the translator could not translate what this person was saying, and the interpreter could not take that and take it forward, and this is how they lost the case. And they know, and it's law, and judges have to sit there and say, okay, this is the case, and it's going like this. You know, so language becomes important, but also let's teach our children from a very early age now to say things as they are. Let's like validate and affirm their feelings, because it's so easy for us to just miss the fact that you were just told by your child that this is what happened, and it's a concern, you know. It's like, oh, we grew up and our uncles used to say this, and they used to say, oh, you're growing a big bum, and it's like, absolutely not. Don't comment on my bum, and you're my uncle, and don't talk to me like that, don't look at me like that, so all of these things, like, you have to be able to empower children from a very early age, and you need to ensure that they know what their right is, and they know how to report that even to family members, because I feel like also even within family, we don't take these conversations forward because, oh my God, oh, that's such a shame for the family. We must report that my dad raped me. So there's a lot that we need to really look into. So many unfortunate cases are as a result of us not being honest with each other and not holding people accountable.
Yeah.
I wanna, sorry, just to add to that, what you were saying, what stays in the house, what happens in the house stays in the house. And it's a continuous fight for this, to break down that dichotomy. Like there's private and there's public, right? And those things can't be, they don't intersect. They are different. They are the separate side. So whatever the state, whatever's public mustn't be or mustn't find itself in issues that are private. And really having to break that down, because it is, and you know, a lot of the protests that have happened raising awareness around gender-based violence have also challenged, you know, the state's attitude of saying that, you know, they need to, on high level, deal with courts or whatever, but not really implement things that impact, you know, even so-called private spaces, to try to challenge gender-based violence, to try to change, you know, ideas around gender-based violence, what it is, what it isn't, and really put a responsibility on them and society as a whole, of course. But really to say that there isn't this divide between, oh, so this is public, oh, that's private. But these things have to fall into one another so that we can see an actual change within it.
Yes. So I think now, just crossing over to the GB Monitor very quickly, Tammy spoke about the secondary victimization within the justice system. Could you kind of give us an overview of reporting GBV cases, specifically to the reasons that contribute to victims not wanting to report their case, or the problems victims face at a SAPS level, because that's a critical conversation.
It is, you know, it is an act of courage when you decide that you're going to report an injustice. And it is, you know, you need even more courage to see this through. And there's various points where, you know, you do experience secondary victimization. And that is even before, you know, you want to take that act of courage to say, this is what has happened to me and I need justice to prevail. arriving at a police station and having to speak to a stranger
Yeah.
about something that is so heinous that has happened to you, it's already something that would discourage you to want to see it through. And just at a general point is that you would speak to a police officer, whoever is made available to you at that time, to say you would like to report domestic violence or rape or assault, whatever it is that you'd be dealing with at the time. And then you would then be given the relevant person from the unit, the family violence GBV unit there at the police station, and then that is where you would then tell your story. So I will use the example of what happens once you then speak to an official who then would put together your rape kit, your crime kit, to then take the process further. The amount of detail that you have to go into, for instance, if you have been raped, is a deterrent for you to really want to go and continue. You have to remember the exact time where you were at the time. You have to remember what this person was wearing or what you were wearing. And as someone who is traumatized or going through the trauma at the time, those aren't really details that you would want to capture in your memory when something like that happens to you. You need to remember, an official will ask you, what was the size of, your perpetrator's genitalia? Do you have an idea, centimeters? That is the kind of, there's no way, chances of you capturing that in that moment are so minimal, but that is the kind of detail that the investigating officer is going to need to take the process forward. And even after that, once then, it gets handed over from SAPS and now into, the court process, that is also very intimidating. It's an act, it's, secondary victimization taking
and a
effect.
high level of secondary trauma.
Yes.
That going through
At
the process
every
itself.
stage of you seeking justice, you are going to fall back into this trauma, having to relive it, this secondary victimization that continues to follow you. And, having to deal with a case manager who then takes you through the process of what it is that you would be expecting once you're going through, trial at that stage. So
Yeah.
those are all examples of just the various stages that you have to conquer that secondary victimization, because that is the reality.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it with the Cheryl Zondi case. I mean, it was publicized almost every day in the news. And we see how the criminal justice system is really out to get you, right? It's not really there to serve you. It is the burden of the survivor to prove, and to be believed and to say, this is what has happened to me and I
Yeah.
need justice to prevail.
So that's why I think it would be doing the public a disservice to speak unilaterally, only from the point of view of, a survivor, because the more evolved way of thinking about this is that as much as we don't really want to admit it, the perpetrator, as much as the survivor, have been victims of the socialization process, because the perpetrator has seen this behavior and they've chosen to repeat it. So we have this male issue that is not recognized as such, at least on their part. On their part, it's not recognized as such. And we have women or marginalized groups having to take accountability for violence that is perpetrated against them. And I think I speak for every woman or marginalized group when I say this. We live very calculated lives. We live calculated lives, and I think each and every single one of us has sent that text. I'll let you know when I get home safe. And that just speaks about the reality that we're facing. And for the most part, I think we'd all agree that we've had these conversations. We've had them, guys. We've had these conversations.
I know
Women's
we're
Day.
I know we're wrapping up, but I'm just saying we must also have them in churches.
Yeah. Women's Day, Women's Month, 16 days of activism. And on that merry-go-round, when that one case spurs that we all just jump on in the social media space. But what are the solutions? Because how do we transition from am I next to what's next? How do we make that transition?
You know, it's so simple because men just need to stop doing it.
It is.
It is not a complicated, convoluted, big thing that we just cannot figure out. Men have a certain level of power. You know, the power dynamics are in their favor. They know they can do this thing, and they do it knowing that chances are they will be able to get away with it. So it's really that simple. Men need to stop doing it. We need to have a different conversation in our own social circles about what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And we just need to believe women, LGBTQIA people as well. When someone comes forward to say, this is what has happened to me, we have a responsibility to respond and to say, I believe you. That is the
Yes.
first response we should always have, because we know how difficult it is to already verbalize this and say, this is what has happened to me. It's already a moment of trauma and secondary victimization. So I think those are the two things that really
Yeah.
stand out. Men should stop doing it, and communities and the system needs to believe and support victims when they come forward.
And it's crazy that you say that, because I think from the standpoint of a perpetrator, it's innocent until proven guilty. And from the standpoint of someone who survives this, it's guilty until proven otherwise. You know, it's the inverse, and that's such an issue. And I think you brought in the existence of theocracy, and I love to entertain that conversation. And I think I would love you to, you know, speak about religion as a construct and how you believe we could have those conversations within those churches.
No, I mean, if we start a conversation about that, that's going to take forever. But I think I just in closing for my end, I think that the conversation must go into various different spaces.
Yes.
And understand how those institutions
Okay.
have kind of like contributed to the injustices of this country. I think humans need to stop, not just men. I think everyone needs to stop doing the wrong thing, because I know of cases where also there are men who've been abused. There are heterosexual men who've been sexually violated, and the groups of individuals, all of us need to stop. Need to stop. You know it's wrong, and when you hear me say no, it's not a no because I'm saying push. You know, and psychology does that. When people are so afraid of hearing somebody say no to them, they try and push and push and push. So pushy people, be aware of them, and let's all stop. Conversations around churches needs a whole different different platform.
Yes.
You know, it needs another 90 minutes, which we don't have. But yeah, you know,
Guys, do you have any
because
plans
God
after this?
because
We will
God
say?
loves us all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, to just, you know, wrap it up, it's more or less, you know, accountability on a part of, you know, the justice system, and also most importantly, having rehabilitation available for those who are part of the justice system. I don't know if there's anything that you can add just before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think I agree, you know, with my panelists. Everybody needs to stop.
Everybody.
And I think these conversations have been had so many times that nobody can say they don't know what intimate partner violence is. Nobody can say that they don't understand what it is, you know, and what's wrong and what's right. And so there needs to be, and if there's anybody who doesn't understand what's wrong and right, you have a responsibility amongst yourself to do the research, do the work, to find out what's right and find out what's wrong. So that so people don't have to suffer at your hands, you know?
Okay.
And I think as well that we need to also ask ourselves, what is it about gender-based violence that makes us uncomfortable to such a point that we have to victimize people that speak out about it? Somebody mentioned that we need to lean into that uncomfortableness. That uncomfortable conversation, that's what we need to lean into. And we need to be, you know, we need to make concerted efforts to make sure that whoever wants to speak out about it, whoever is speaking out about it, whoever is a survivor who's saying, you know, this is my perpetrator, this is what they did,
Perfect.
we need to hold space for that person. We need to make
Yes.
sure there's enough spaces for people to be able to do the work that they have to do around this. And as soon as we find ourselves in a position where people no longer are able to do that, then we're in serious trouble.
Perfect. Thank you so much to the panel. You guys are absolutely incredible, and I hope, if anything, this is a moment that serves it's not only a knowledgeable moment. I think it's one that we need to bring about that action that is necessary. It's all about, you know, developments on the ground, and that's what we're working towards. So thank you guys so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That wasn't so.
Oh, I thought these.